Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're breaking down a challenge that defines October elk hunting: locating solitary bulls after the rut. September hunts are full of noise, chaos, and bugles echoing across the canyons. But once the rut winds down, everything changes. Cows drift back into smaller groups, younger bulls scatter, and the mature herd bulls that were screaming their lungs out a few weeks ago vanish into quiet pockets of the mountain. For a lot of hunters, that silence is a wall they can't get through. They stop hearing elk, stop seeing elk, and think the season's over. But the truth is, some of the best bulls of the year are still out there. They're just in recovery mode, and they're living differently than they did in September. In this episode, we're going to dig deep into why bulls peel off and go solo, how their needs shift after the rut, and where to look for them once October sets in. We'll cover the kind of habitat they hole up in, how to use feed and water to predict their movements, how to glass and track them when they're not giving themselves away with bugles, and how to close the distance once you've located one. By the end, you'll know how to put yourself in front of a big, worn down October bull when most hunters have already packed it in or are simply searching the roads. So why do bulls go solo in October? When October rolls around, a bull's entire world looks different than it did just weeks earlier. In September, everything was about the rut. Fighting for cows, bugling to advertise dominance, burning energy from daylight to dark. By October, that drive to breed is fading away and survival takes over. This is the number one reason bulls break away and go solo. Think about what they've just been through. A mature herd bull has spent weeks pushing cows, chasing off satellite bulls, and running back and forth across ridges every time a rival lets out a bugle. He's probably been in multiple fights, he's eaten less, slept less, and burned through a massive amount of body fat. By the time the rut ends, his body is wrecked. He knows winter is coming, and if he doesn't recover quickly, he may not survive. That recovery process, refueling and regaining strength, is why he disappears into those hidden pockets of the mountain. October bulls are tired bulls. They don't want attention. They don't want to cover ground. They don't want to risk another fight. Their priority is simple: eat, rest, and stay alive. This is why they often peel away from the bigger groups of elk and slip into more secluded areas. A big bull can spend days in the same little patch of timber if it provides food, water, and security cover. Younger bulls act differently. They'll often stay closer to cow groups through October, still hanging on to the idea of finding a late cycle cow to breed. But the older bulls, the ones with heavy antlers and scarred hides, they know better. They aren't chasing bugles anymore. They're looking for the quiet, overlooked spots where they can feed undisturbed. If you've ever wondered why you stop hearing bugles in October, this is why. Those herd bulls have gone underground, so to speak, and they're not advertising themselves anymore. Another reason bulls go solo has to do with security. After a month of the rut, every hunter in the mountain knows where the action was. Those same drainages, meadows, and ridges that echoed with bugles in September have usually been pounded by hunting pressure. Bulls that survived, they didn't survive by being careless. By October, they've had enough close calls to push them into safer country. That might mean deeper timber, steeper slopes, or patches of terrain other hunters don't bother with. There's also an instinctual element at play. Bulls know winter is coming. They start shifting into areas with better feed and cover, often moving toward lower elevations or more sheltered slopes. The ones that go solo first are often the mature bulls who understand survival on a deeper level. They'll leave behind the chaos of the herds and tuck themselves into the kinds of places where you won't bump into them by accident. Here's the bottom line. When bulls go solo in October, it's not random. They're recovering, conserving energy, and prioritizing survival. If you want to find them, you've got to put yourself into their mindset. Ask yourself, if I was beat down, worn out, and trying to rebuild before winter, where would I go? That question is the foundation for every decision you make when you're hunting October bulls. So what is the difference between October bull behavior versus September? If September is a month of chaos and noise, October is the opposite. The contrast in bull behavior between the rut and the post-rut is very dramatic, and if you don't adjust your mindset, you'll spend a lot of October feeling like the elk just vanished, but they haven't. They're just living differently. In September, bulls are constantly on the move. They're chasing cows, bugling across canyons, and answering every challenge that drifts through the timber. They're highly visible because their focus isn't on survival, it's on breeding. You can hear them from a mile away. You can catch them out in open meadows in broad daylight. They're oftentimes reckless, distracted, and vulnerable. That's what makes September the most exciting month in elk hunting. But once the rut winds down, bulls shift gears fast. By October, that constant vocalization almost disappears. A bull might bugle once or twice at night or let out a half-hearted bugle in the early morning, but for the most part, they go silent. It's not because they've left the mountain. It's because bugling doesn't serve them anymore. Drawing attention means risk, and risk is the last thing a worn-down bull wants when he's trying to recover. Travel patterns change too. So remember, during September, bulls will cover huge amounts of ground, running ridges and chasing herds from drainage to drainage. But in October, that movement shrinks. Bulls tighten up their home ranges, sticking close to areas with food, water, and thick cover. Instead of being spread thin across the mountain, they become more predictable in a smaller pocket of country. They'll often bed within 100 yards of their feed and water, eliminating the need to expose themselves during daylight. Feeding behavior changes as well. In September, bulls spend a lot of daylight hours out in the open feeding with their harems, even at times they normally wouldn't. They can't afford to sneak off for long because cows might drift away or a rival bull might challenge them. But in October, they feed more naturally again, early mornings, late evenings, and sometimes throughout the night. They prefer secluded feeding spots, small openings in the timber, brushy benches, or fringes of meadows, where they can slip in and out without drawing attention. Bedding behavior also shifts. During the rut, you'll often find bulls bedding where their cows want to be, even if it's not the most secure place. They're slaves to the herd. In October, they reclaim their independence. They choose bedding areas with thick cover, cool north-facing slopes, and vantage points that give them security. A solitary October bull might stay bedded longer during the day and move less overall. This is why it can feel like they've disappeared, because they've simply become harder to see and hear. One last key difference here is their temperament. In September, bulls are aggressive. They'll charge into a bugle. They'll square up with rivals. They're wired for confrontation. In October, they become cautious, almost paranoid. They've survived the gauntlet of hunters and rivals, and now every move they make is calculated. If something feels wrong, a faint whiff of human scent, an unnatural sound, a shape out of place, they'll slip away silently and you'll never know they were there. So here's the takeaway. Don't hunt October bulls like it's still September. If you're waiting on a screaming bugle to guide you, you're going to hike yourself ragged and come home empty. Instead, make sure you're trying to pay attention to the subtle signs, the small patches of fresh poop, the hidden feeding areas, the single set of tracks heading into thick cover. Learn to think like a bull who's worn out, wary, and trying to disappear. That shift in mindset is the key to turning quiet October hunts into success. So, what are some of the habits solitary bulls favor? One of the biggest mistakes a lot of hunters make in October is continuing to look for bulls in the same places they found them in September. The bugle basins, the open meadows, the ridges that lit up during the rut. Those spots oftentimes go dead. Mature bulls aren't hanging out where they were visible and vocal. They're slipping into pockets of country that give them three things: security, food, and rest. If you know what kind of habitat offers that combination, you can start stacking the odds in your favor. The first kind of place I key in on is dark north-facing timber. These slopes stay cooler during the day, they hold moisture longer, and they offer shade and cover that bulls crave. A bull trying to recover from the rut wants to stay cool, avoid bugs, and be invisible. That dark timber checks all those boxes. You may never see him in there, but if you glass carefully at first light or catch tracks heading in or out, you'll know you're in the right zone. Another prime October hideout is remote benches and shelves. Bulls love to bed on flat spots partway down a slope, especially if those benches are tucked into thick timber with a quick escape route. A bench gives a bull a vantage point to watch below, but also the cover to stay hidden. These spots are often overlooked because most hunters either glass open ridges or march right past benches on their way to the top. Broken terrain and side pockets are also worth your attention. Mature bulls don't always move far in October, but they want to be somewhere they can disappear quickly. Side drainages, small cuts, and broken timber patches create that kind of country. If it looks like a place you'd never glass because it seems too small or too thick, that's exactly where a worn-out bull might be holed up. Don't overlook north-facing avalanche chutes either, or old burns that have grown back thick with young timber. These places give bulls a combination of new growth feed and excellent cover. An October bull can tuck into those thick regrowth areas, step out a few yards to feed, then disappear again in seconds. Hunters often glass right past these zones because they look too messy or too choked with cover, but that's exactly what makes them attractive to elk that don't want to be seen. Elevation shifts also play a role in October. Depending on the weather, bulls may start dropping into slightly lower country. If snow hits the high basins or if feed dries up, bulls will slide down into mid-elevation timber. That doesn't mean they're headed for winter range yet, but they're making more subtle moves to places that offer both feed and security as conditions change. If you're still looking high when snow has pushed them down, you'll think they've vanished. Finally, try to remember that solitary bulls pick overlooked spots. These aren't the obvious glassing hillsides or meadows every hunter walks past on opening morning. They're the little timber pockets, the benches nobody stops to glass, the brushy draws half a mile off the main trail. The older bull, the more likely he is to choose the places most hunters don't think are worth their time. The bottom line here is that October bulls aren't in random country. They're in habitats that let them eat, rest, and stay hidden. If you discipline yourself to focus less on where the rut was hot and more on the quiet, shaded, overlooked terrain, you'll start turning up those solitary bulls that everyone else walks right by. How can we use the feed and water areas to predict elk movement? If September is all about breeding, October is all about rebuilding. Solitary bulls are worn down from weeks of chasing, fighting, and bugling, and the only way they make it through the coming winter is by putting weight back on. That means feed and water become their top priorities. And if you learn how to identify where they're getting both, you can narrow down their location dramatically. Let's start with feed. In early October, bulls are still looking for high quality forage, grasses, forbs, and any remaining green up on the high country. But as frost starts to hit and snow begins to show up, the landscape changes fast. Those lush meadows that were hot spots in September dry up, and bulls shift to whatever feed holds the most nutrition. That often means lower elevation grasses, those can stay green longer, brushy patches with bitterbrush or serviceberry, and edges of timber where forbs hang on longer. Bulls don't want to travel far to feed, so they'll often tuck into timber pockets that border these food sources, stepping out at first and last light to grab a quick meal before disappearing again. October bulls are also opportunistic, right? If there's a burn with fresh regrowth, they'll use it. If there's an irrigated hayfield near public land, they'll stage just off it at night. And if there's a south-facing slope holding the last bit of green grass, they'll feed there until it's gone. The key is to look for the areas that still provide calorie-dense feed when the rest of the mountain is drying out. Think about where the moisture lingers the longest: north slopes, creek bottoms, benches with shade, and you'll often find sign of a bull nearby. Now let's talk about water. In September, water is often tied to wallows and rut activity, but by October, wallows don't matter nearly as much. Bulls still need to drink, but they're not rolling in mud and advertising their presence. Instead, they're quietly slipping down to creeks, seeps, or small springs. A solitary bull wants to water as close to his bedding area as possible, ideally without exposing himself. That means those hidden seeps in dark timber, little trickles running through side draws, and tucked away ponds become far more important than the obvious big creeks or wallows hunters target earlier in the season. The connection between feed and water is critical. October bulls want efficiency. They're not traveling miles across open ridges like they did during the rut. They want a tight little home range where they can feed, bed, and water without burning much energy. If you can find a spot where quality forage sits within a half mile of a dependable water source and both are surrounded by heavy cover, you've likely found a prime October bull hideout. One more thing to remember, timing. Bulls often feed heavily at night in October, especially with hunting pressure around. By dawn, they're slipping back into timber. That means you may not catch them out in the open, but you can still intercept them moving between feed and cover at first light or last light. If you can't be there during those windows, look for sign, fresh tracks, poop, or chewed up vegetation near food sources. That'll tell you a bull is working that area even if you don't happen to see him with your own eyes. The takeaway here is that October bulls are slaves to their stomachs and their need for recovery. Find the quiet combination of feed and water tucked close to security cover, and you'll find where they're spending their time. Once you identify that triangle, food, water, and cover, you've essentially mapped out a bull's entire October routine. Now, what are some of the glassing tactics we can use for lone bulls? Glassing in October is a completely different game than glassing in September. During the rut, you can park yourself on a high ridge, scan a big basin, and sooner or later you'll spot a herd with a bull pushing cows. The noise, the movement, and the size of those groups makes them stand out. But when bulls go solitary in October, that visibility disappears. You're no longer glassing for herds, you're glassing for a single bull that wants to stay hidden. And that means you need to change how you approach it. The first adjustment is slowing down. In September, you can glass fast, bouncing from meadow to meadow or ridge to ridge because elk are constantly on the move. In October, you need to crawl with your optics. A solitary bull may only show, a tine, a rump, a flick of an ear through a patch of timber. He's not wanting to leave that. If you're glassing too quickly, you're going to miss those subtle signs. So take your time. Break down every piece of cover. Scan timber edges, small benches, and shady north slopes with the same attention you'd give to an open hillside in September. Another tactic is grid glassing with purpose. Instead of randomly scanning a hillside, break it into sections and cover each piece carefully. Start at the bottom, work across, then move up a line and work back to the other direction. This methodical approach keeps you from skipping over small pockets where a bull might be bedded. When you're looking for one animal instead of a herd, every little detail matters. October also rewards long sits. Don't expect to glass for 10 minutes real quick and turn up a bull. Solitary bulls spend a lot of time bedded, and when they do move, it's usually during low light windows. That means you may have to spend hours behind the glass waiting for a bull to make a mistake. The more patient you are, the more likely you'll catch that movement when he slips out of cover to feed or shift beds. Timing is everything. First light and last light are still your best chances, but in October, don't ignore midday glassing either. Bulls often get up to stretch, shift beds, or grab a quick bite around midday. If you've got a vantage point over a bedding area, stick it out longer than you think you need to. That midday movement might be your only chance to spot him. When it comes to location, focus your glassing on transition zones. Bulls in October rarely spend much time in wide open meadows. Instead, they work the fringes, edges of burns, small clearings in timber, benches with brushy feed, and shady pockets near water. These are the kinds of places you need to pick apart with your optics. One last key is using shadows to your advantage. October sun angles are lower, and bulls know how to use that shade to disappear. A bull can bed 10 yards inside a dark timber patch and be invisible unless you catch the shine of an antler or a subtle flicker of movement. Pay special attention to those shadowed areas when glassing in the morning and evening. Here's the bottom line. Glassing October bulls isn't about finding herds. It's about detecting one animal that's doing everything he can to stay hidden. If you slow down, grid carefully, glass the right habitat, and stay patient, you'll start to see things most hunters overlook. That single tine glinting in the shadows may be the only clue you get, but it's enough to put you on a bull when the rest of the mountain looks empty. So how do we use tracking sign and reading country to find solo bulls? When October rolls around, your eyes and ears alone aren't enough. You can glass for hours and never lay eyes on a solitary bull because he's tucked away in cover and only moving under the protection of darkness or shadows. That's why learning to read sign in October is just as important as glassing. Fresh tracks, poop, rubs, and beds can tell you more about a bull's presence than anything else. If you want to find those ghosts of the post-rut, you've got to become a detective. An elk detective. Start with tracks. A mature bull leaves a bigger, deeper track than cows or younger bulls. The dew claws often register in softer ground and the stride will be longer. In October, tracks are gold because they'll tell you not only if a bull is around, but also how recently he's been there. Crisp edges of the tracks mean he walked through in the last day. Rounded edges mean it's been a bit longer. After a frost or a light snow, fresh tracks stand out like neon signs. When you cut a big track, don't just admire it, follow it. This can be a very highly effective tactic. Trust me, we use it all the time. See where it leads. Often you'll find it heading into thick cover near food or water, and that gives you a blueprint of his routine. Next, look for the poop. In September, elk scat can be scattered everywhere, especially around herds. But by October, solitary bull sign becomes more isolated. A big bull dropping is usually larger and the freshness tells you the story. Glossy and wet, he was just there. Dried and cracked, it's old. Droppings near secluded feeding areas or tucked along the edge of timber can confirm that a bull is actively working that spot, even if you don't see him. Beds are another huge clue. A solitary bull will often create large oval depressions in thick timber or shaded benches. If you find multiple beds in the same area, especially with fresh droppings nearby, you've likely found a bull's bedroom. Pay attention to the orientation of the bed too. Bulls often bed with the wind at their back and a view of their escape routes. If you can piece that together, you'll understand not just where he's lying down, but how he's using the terrain to stay alive. Rubs can be deceptive in October, right? Most of the rut-driven rubbing, slows down or has been long done, right? But there are times when you can still find rubs bulls made in September, and they're not as reliable for locating a bull in the post-rut. But if you find fresh, sappy rubs this late in the season, it's worth noting. Sometimes they're still just frustrated and rubbing there. So sometimes a bull will freshen an old rub just to work off tension. Don't rely on rubs alone, but keep them in the back of your mind as a bigger part of the picture. Another overlooked sign is scattered feed. Bulls are messy eaters, and when they're feeding on brush, they'll often clip twigs or, crunch up branches and stuff, and they'll leave that sign on the ground in those areas. So your droppings and tracks, along with that feed, gives you strong evidence that a bull is working that area. This is especially valuable in thick timber where glassing is limited. And finally, try to broaden your perspective and read the country itself. Ask yourself, does this pocket of terrain offer feed, water, and cover that are close together? Are there escape routes that let a bull slip away if pressured? If the answer is yes, it's prime October bull country. Even if you don't find obvious sign right away, don't dismiss it. Bulls don't lay down a trail of breadcrumbs. You often have to put the puzzle together from subtle little pieces, right? The bottom line here is that October bulls leave a trail if you're disciplined enough to look for it. Fresh tracks, isolated poop that's fresh, hidden beds, and small feeding clues can often all point to a solitary bull's presence. Glassing tells you where to look, but sign confirms where he actually lives. If you commit to reading the mountain like a book, you'll find bulls in October when everyone else is walking past the evidence. How does pressure and security cover work this time of year? If there's one factor that reshapes October elk hunting more than any other, it's pressure. By the time October rolls around, bulls have already endured a month of hunters, calls, arrows, and stuff echoing across the canyon that all scream human. They've been bumped out of drainages, chased off meadows, and narrowly escaped more close calls than most people realize. The older the bull, the more he's learned from those encounters. And by October, that education dictates exactly where he lives. The truth here is that bulls don't disappear in October, they relocate. And 9 times out of 10, they relocate to security cover. This isn't the pretty meadow you can glass from a mile away. It's not the easy to reach saddle every hunter crosses opening morning. It's the thickest, nastiest, most overlooked patches of country they can find. The places where human traffic is light and survival odds are high. Security cover can take a lot of forms. In some country, it's a patch of dark north-facing timber that never sees sunlight. In others, it's a steep, broken canyon choked with downfall and blowdown where moving silent is nearly impossible. Sometimes it's as simple as brushy benches, a mile from the nearest trail where nobody ever stops to look. What ties all of these places together is this: hunters avoid them and elk know it. One mistake a lot of hunters make is assuming pressure pushes elk way back into the wilderness. And while a lot of times that's true, a lot of times bulls also don't necessarily go further, they just go smarter. They find micro pockets close to pressure but hidden enough to keep them safe. That could be a strip of timber above a popular trailhead or a side drainage just one ridge over from where hunters are, tracking them nonstop. If you're willing to check the spots that don't look appealing or are flat out uncomfortable to hunt, you'll often find bulls that other hunters are walking right past. October bulls also rely heavily on visual and wind security. They'll choose bedding areas where they can see below and feel the thermals at their back. That's why sneaking into these areas requires extra discipline. You can't come barging in. Every step has to account for wind, thermals, and noise. Another point here is that hunting pressure isn't just human. In some areas, you guys are going to be dealing with wolves, bears, and lions, which all put stress on elk. And by October, bulls are extremely wary of all predators, including humans. That predator pressure reinforces the same habits that human pressure does: tighter ranges, heavier cover, and heightened paranoia. Every twig snap matters. Every shift in wind direction matters. The bulls that survive this long have mastered the art of vanishing, and that's why they're so hard to kill in October. So how do you adapt? First, try to embrace the mindset that security cover is your target, not open meadows. Don't waste prime morning hours glassing giant fields if they're void of fresh sign. Instead, dive into thick, ugly spots. Still hunt the edges of dark timber. Post up on the fringes of brushy benches where you've seen tracks slipping in and out. Glass side pockets and overlook corners rather than just the obvious basins. Second, respect the wind like your life depends on it. A bull in October might tolerate a lot less noise or movement than he would during the rut. One puff of bad wind and he's gone. You may never hear him crash out, you'll just show up to a dead, empty pocket that looked alive yesterday. At this point in October, pressure teaches bulls exactly where to go, and it's almost always where hunters don't want to follow. If you're willing to grind into those overlooked, gnarly, quiet spots and play the wind like a surgeon, you'll find bulls that everyone else swears left the unit. They didn't leave, they just moved to very, very nasty security cover. So how does weather impact October elk movement? If September hunts are shaped by the rut, October hunts are shaped by the weather. Once bulls shift into survival mode, every cold front, snowstorm, and warm spell dictates how they use the mountain. If you're not paying attention to these changes, you'll always feel a step behind. But if you learn to read the weather the way bulls do, you can predict where they'll be before you ever lace up your boots. Let's start with cold snaps. The first real cold front of October can flip a switch. Overnight lows drop, mornings get frosty, and bulls start feeding harder in daylight to pack on calories. Cold snaps push elk out of exposed areas and into dark timber earlier. And they're, also more likely to become active during shooting hours. A bull that was feeding strictly at night may suddenly show up on a shaded bench at first light if a cold front has him burning more energy. Hunters who are glassing right at gray light will often catch their best glimpses of bulls during these transitions. Now let's talk about snow. Snow is both a blessing and a curse. Even a few inches will change how bulls use the terrain. Fresh snow makes tracks stand out and can be the best tool you'll ever have for locating a solitary bull. You can cut a track at daylight and follow it into his bedding area. Sometimes that's almost impossible without snow. But snow also starts to shift bulls lower, especially if it's deep enough to cover feed. Early October snowstorms can push elk down into mid-elevation sooner than most hunters expect. If you're still glassing high basins while bulls are slipping into lower timber, you'll think they've disappeared. On the flip side, warm weather in October can be brutal. If temperatures climb, bulls hole up even deeper in shade and move even less during daylight. You may only get a slim window at dawn or dusk to catch them moving. Warm spells also dry out feed quickly, forcing bulls to find green pockets wherever they still exist. That often means creek bottoms, north-facing slopes, or shaded benches. When it's warm, you need to tighten your focus to those little micro-habitats that stay cooler and hold moisture longer. Wind is another overlooked weather factor. In October, bulls are hypersensitive to scent. Gusty, swirling winds can make it nearly impossible to approach them. But consistent winds tied to a cold front or storm give you a huge advantage. If you've ever had a bull bust you because the thermal switched at midday, you know how fragile setups can be. In October, you need to hunt with the wind in mind at all times. Plan your entry routes not just for where the bull is, but for how the wind will shift during your hunt. Cloud cover can also influence movement. Overcast skies stretch out the morning and evening feeding windows because bulls feel safer in dim light. On clear, bright mornings, they'll often bail to cover quickly. On gray, cloudy mornings, they may linger a little longer. It's a small detail, but in October, small details add up to filled tags. October bulls are weather-driven. Cold fronts get them moving, snow shifts them lower, warm spells bury them in cover, and every wind or cloud change affects their decisions. If you want to find them, don't just check the forecast for your comfort. Read it for theirs. Ask yourself, how does this weather change affect where a worn-down bull can feed, bed, and feel safe? If you can answer that, you'll stay one step ahead of the game. How can we seal the deal in October? Finding a solitary bull in October is only half the battle. The real challenge comes when you try to close the distance. These aren't rut-drunk bulls charging at bugles anymore. They're cautious, quiet, and survival-focused. To kill an October bull, you've got to play the game of patience, precision, and discipline. So let's start with stalking. When you spot a bull in October, assume it's the only opportunity you're going to get at him. You may not even see another elk. Every move you make has to be calculated. That begins with the wind. If there's one thing that ends more October stalks than anything else, it's bad wind. A bull that spends weeks dodging hunters won't tolerate even a faint whiff of human scent. Before you take a single step, map out the wind patterns for that time of day, the terrain, and the thermals, not just where you are, but where he is. If you're not 100% confident in your wind, don't go. Wait, shift your angle, come back later. Rushing in will blow it. The second piece of stalking is speed control. In September, you sometimes need to move fast to keep up with the bugling bull, right? In October, you need to slow way down. Bulls aren't covering ground like they were. They're bedding for long stretches, feeding in small pockets, and moving with caution. Your job is to move slower than you think you need to. Every step should be deliberate. Every piece of cover should be used. Don't skyline yourself. Don't crash through brush, and don't assume he'll forgive a mistake. If you make one wrong move, he's gone, and he won't circle back like a rutting bull might. Now let's talk ambush hunting. October bulls are predictable in ways September bulls aren't. They're often running tight routines: bed, feed, water, repeat. If you can identify a travel corridor between those needs, you've got a chance to set up and wait him out. That might mean sitting a hidden water seep he hits at midday, posting on the edge of a brushy bench he feeds on at dawn, or watching a timbered saddle he uses to move from bed to feed. Ambush hunts in October require patience. You might sit all day and see nothing, but when you're dialed in on the right spot, your odds skyrocket. One of the best ambush strategies is targeting transition zones at first and last light. Bulls often move short distances from their bedding cover to feed right at dark, then slip back just after dawn. If you can get between those 2 points without blowing your wind, you can intercept him. It feels slow compared to the run and gun style of September, but it's tailor-made for October. Another overlooked tactic is using terrain for concealment. October bulls are less vocal, which means you have to rely on sight and sign to make your play. When you do move, hug the contours of the land. Use ridgelines, folds, and brush to hide your approach. If you can keep him from ever laying eyes on you, you're in the game. If you expose yourself, he's gone. And finally, know when not to move. Sometimes the best play on a solitary October bull is to mark his location, back out, and return under better conditions. Whether that means waiting for the wind to steady, letting him settle into a routine, or setting up an ambush for another day. Patience kills more bulls in October than pushing too hard ever will. So in October, you got to remember that every move counts. Stalks need perfect wind, perfect patience, and perfect timing. Ambushes need careful planning and hours of discipline. If you treat October bulls like rutting bulls, you're going to come home empty. But if you hunt them like the wary, survival-driven animals they are, you're going to have the best shot at killing a mature bull when everyone else thinks the mountain has gone dead. Hunting solitary bulls in October is a different kind of grind. The bugling chaos of September fades, and what's left are quiet mountains, cautious elk, and hunters who often give up too soon. But if you've made it this far, you understand the shift. October isn't about running ridges, blowing bugles, and chasing echoes. It's about discipline. It's about slowing down, and it's about thinking like a bull who's worn out, paranoid, and focused entirely on survival. So we've talked about why bulls go solo after the rut, how their behavior changes from September, the habits that they favor when security and recovery become the top priorities. We dug into the role of feed and water, how to glass effectively when bulls are doing everything they can to stay hidden, and how to read sign that confirms their presence even when your eyes and ears fail you. We've covered the influence of hunting pressure, the way weather reshapes bull movement, and the patience it takes to stalk or ambush a bull when he's at his wariest. The lesson in all of this is simple. October bulls don't vanish. They don't leave the country. They don't quit existing. They just retreat into smaller, quieter, overlooked places of the mountain. If you're willing to adapt, to hunt slower, read sign, respect the wind, and grind it out in tough country, you'll still find them. And when you do, the satisfaction of putting your tag on an October bull is hard to beat. You didn't luck into a screaming herd. You outsmarted one of the wariest animals on the mountain. Now, if you're serious about taking this kind of knowledge deeper, that's exactly why I built Team Backbone. It's more than just a membership. It's a way to sharpen your edge with exclusive tools, strategies, and a tribe of hunters who refuse to quit. Inside our team, you're going to get 20% off site-wide on all Backbone Unlimited gear, a member-only t-shirt shipped to your door every month, not available anywhere else, full access to the digital content vault, guides, checklists, fitness programming, backcountry strategies, and mindset training, a private Facebook group with direct access to me, and a community of driven hunters who live relentless. You're also going to get direct call, text, and email access to me for personalized advice on training, hunting strategy, or just sharpening your edge, and automatic entry into monthly gear giveaways. This membership is built for the guys who train for the hunt, push themselves in the off-season, and want to be part of a tribe that makes them better. If you're ready for that kind of inner circle, then Team Backbone is waiting at backboneunlimited.com under our membership tab. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.